What's up, everybody? Welcome back to First Round Frenzy. Matt and Cole here again, and the combine has officially ended. Just a few hours ago, the offensive lineman finished up. Some really impressive performances there. We're gonna go day by day here, recap of the combine, some of our winners, our losers, some standout performers. Just give sort of our opinions on what we saw. Uh, Cole, we're gonna start with you, defensive linemen and linebackers. First of all, how you doing? And then where do you want to start with that group?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Good little weekend, being able to check out different prospects, how they were doing throughout the week. And we saw a lot of close to actually a couple of record-breaking performances in terms of RAS scores go and combine results. And good insights as always from the combine. So it's been a great week, great event. The big thing I think we want to mention before we get into some of the positionals and
Yep.
like winners or losers, was like injuries and people who were skipping performances, not seeing a lot of guys, a lot of the main quarterbacks. We didn't see Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward throw. We didn't see Abdul Carter work out. Those are probably the top three picks in the draft we didn't get to see really on the field this week. Mason Graham, potential top five pick as well.
And
Bill
Loveland
Johnson.
too.
Yeah, Colson
Yep.
Loveland. So that was, a big knock to the event as a whole, but we still saw a lot of guys make some names for themselves. I mean, even Gunnar Helm, and we
Yeah.
talked about him earlier today off before we got started with this about his ankle sprain it looked like he had. So that definitely affected his numbers that we saw the other day that were concerning because they were like, wow, what's going on with
Is he
Gunnar
so
Helm?
slow? Yeah.
Yeah, why is he so slow? It's because he sprained his ankle. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of thing kind of was a big storyline throughout the weekend, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think it might not have necessarily a negative effect on those specific players that set out, but it honestly might have a positive effect on some of these other guys that did perform, especially the record breakers that we're going to talk about and stuff like that, because they were able to kind of separate themselves from the rest of the group that was there and didn't have to compete against some of the top players. So it'll be interesting to see how those players sitting out and these players doing so well, how that kind of impacts how teams put these guys on draft boards. So let's get started. I think you talked about record breakers. I think when we talk about the D line, first guy we got to talk about is Shamar Stewart. Texas A&M put on an absolute showcase, perfect 10 RAS score. Kind of started the weekend off on a really high note. Um, I think we were talking about this earlier. We're not entirely sold on him still because the production is still down. What do you think his performance at the combine did for him? Did it do enough for you to say, yeah, he's worth a top 15 pick?
That's still, up for the debate and it depends on how people view that production. I mean, yeah, he's matching perfectly to Miles Garrett and like a freak athlete, unlike anything we've seen, testing wise, athletically, all the things that, we saw at the combine with all the numerical values. But the main numerical value is 4.5 sacks in 3 years. And while that concerns some teams, the two comps I found were Adafe Owe. He had seven, I think 7 or 7.5 sacks in his college career and was still, a first round pick going to Baltimore. And then the other one that I really liked as a comp was Danielle Hunter, who had exactly 4.5 sacks in 3 years in college. And he was a second round pick. So I think, that's kind of what we're looking at here, potentially with Shamar Stewart. I don't think he did enough as great as he looked and record breaking as it was. I still am going to be questionable if I were a GM taking him in the top 15 picks, in my opinion. So I think maybe somewhere in the 20s, we'll see someone take the risk on the athleticism
Yeah.
with Shamar Stewart.
I was gonna say, I think the strength of this draft class as well at the position kind of plays a factor in that. I'm seeing a lot of people saying he's potentially a top 15 pick. Is he going to the Falcons at 15 or earlier? But you look at some of these names in this. I mean, take out Abdul Carter and Mike Green, who will most likely go in the top 15. I mean, we're looking at James Pierce, who's dropping because of character concerns. And we're looking at Michael Williams, who's been really big. We're looking at Jalen Walker as potentially an edge rusher. Um, there's so many players at this position. Are you willing to take a top 15 pick bet on this one guy and say, yeah, he didn't have the production, but look at him. Like he's got everything that you need to be productive. He just hasn't done it yet. So it'll be interesting to see how teams look on draft night and like how how they kind of stack their boards with him on there. Personally, I'm on the same boat. I'm kind of like a late first to early second round pick on him if I were in that position. It also depends on the team, though. If you don't need him right away, maybe you take a little bit of an earlier hit on him. But anyway, Shamar obviously had a great week. Some other winners for me personally. Derek Harmon looked really good in the on-field drills. Darius Alexander had a really good all-around day. And then the two guys that we talked about in our defensive line, and defensive line episode, Deion Walker and Ty Robinson both had
Yeah.
really good days all around. Uh, so let's start the conversation there on the interior. What do you think of those guys? Who else stood out to you?
Yeah, I think in terms of the late first round guys that I thought were on the radar, pretty much established themselves as such with Derek Harmon and Darius Alexander. Both had really good weeks. Derek Harmon, I really loved his interviews as well. And I think both of them squeezed in the late 20s. I like Derek Harmon. I mean, that's my guy for the Packers right now.
All right,
As my personal
there you
homer
go.
pick. He's my
So it's
guy
not
right
going to the
now.
Packers then.
Yeah, so he's not going to. But the same with Darius Alexander. I think there's some teams late, those playoff teams that need some interior presence that will appease to those teams as well. So I can see him getting in the back end of the second round. And Deion Walker, man, he checked the boxes I like for what I like in my run stuffing, gap defensive players on that, big body, and he can move. That guy was moving during his on-field
Oh yeah,
drills, and that's everything I needed to see out of him.
yeah,
Landon Jackson as well, I thought had a really
yeah.
good day.
He had a really good week.
Yeah, he was going like step for step during the explosive drills with Shamar Stewart and was like right there,
Yep,
right behind them at top of their position group. Had a little bit of a slower 40 than Shamar Stewart, but I mean, for a guy that we weren't really talking about going into the week, now you're talking about him. That's what this combine was all about.
exactly. And I think one of the things we'll talk about this a little later with the running backs, but the entire draft process, we've talked about this D line group as being extremely deep and having a lot of talent. And this week just, it certified that, right? I mean, you're looking at a lot of guys, in the bottom half of our top tens that we did, Ty Robinson, CJ West, uh, Braden Swinson, who was in our honorable mentions, had a really good week as well. Tyleek Williams, I'd heard a lot of people talking about him. He looked really good in on-field drills as well. And then there were some other guys that I hadn't even really bothered to watch film yet on, but Jared Harrison Hunt out of SMU had a really good week for the interior, and so did Elijah Simmons out of Tennessee. So I think one of the things that we learned from this week about this group at the edge and the interior is that there are plenty of options here that in the second and third round on day two, you have a very good chance of getting a stud at this position. So it'll be interesting to see, who goes where. But there's definitely a lot of movement in from what I'm hearing in terms of some of these guys, especially Ty Robinson and Deion Walker, kind of moving up boards, potentially solidifying themselves as early day two picks potentially. So we'll see what happens, but I really liked what I saw out of this group.
Yeah, I mean, we knew they're going to be a strong group going into it.
Yep. So let's move to linebackers real quick. I mean, the highlight, Jihad Campbell.
Yeah.
He had a tremendous performance. And I mean, all around, whether it was on the drills or in the uh, physicals, he stood out from everybody. He looked explosive. He looked good in coverage drills. He looked quick. I really liked him. And then the other guy that actually stood out to me was Teddy Buchanan out of California. He was a guy that I hadn't watched film on yet. Watched it this weekend. He's a guy that's kind of like that, potentially squeaking into that day two conversation for me at linebacker.
Yeah, Jihad Campbell, I think for him, he established himself. We were talking about being in the fringe first round. I don't think it's fringe anymore. I think
No.
he's going to be a first round lock. And I'm trying to pull it up. I know there was um, Jack Campbell for the Lions, but I'm trying to think the last time like an off ball like middle linebacker, which that's where I see him fitting, was drafted in the first round because you talk about first round running backs on the offensive side, it's pretty rare.
I mean, the
But
closest you get is probably what's their names? That both of them went in the first round, Ravens and
oh, Patrick Queen.
Yeah, Patrick Queen and I forget the other guy's name that went in the first round that year, but that would probably be the closest thing since then. Then you go back to
Clay Walker, yeah.
yeah, Quay Walker potentially. Yeah,
Devin Lloyd going back to 2022. So yeah, it's not very often you see like these middle linebackers, and also he's not just a middle linebacker. This guy can rush the passer too, and he showed off some speed and athleticism today that show or earlier this weekend, not today, but showed off some of that where he can still be that kind of player. So it's gonna be interesting once we get to our second mock draft. I'm gonna be looking at different teams throughout the next couple of days and see where I see him as a fit in the first round because it's no question to me, in my opinion, that he's gonna be in the top 32 selections. It's just which team's gonna value that positional value in the first round and ignore that to take a guy like him after what we saw.
exactly. So let's move on. Day two, we got the defensive backs and the tight ends. We'll start with the defensive backs. Um, Travis Hunter not doing anything, saying it wasn't his decision to go in as a DB. That's something big.
Hmm.
There was
Yeah.
different conversation of why is he doing that? It's because teams requested it. So that's the big story. Let's talk about that first real quick. He wanted to go and compete for both positions. He wanted to go there and do that. Obviously, he didn't work out at all. Should teams be able to decide what position you go into, or should he have been able to compete in both if he wanted to compete?
Yeah, definitely they can, favor one or the other, in my opinion. In terms of forcing him to do it, I mean, I get why he didn't really perform at all if that was the case. But
Yep.
seeing how some of these wide receivers performed, I, would have liked to have seen, the difference he would have made. And seeing him in comparison to some of these wide receivers, I didn't think really a lot of them really impressed me too much from what we were expecting going into it. I left that day pretty under uh underpleased, I guess, or displeased from that group. And just in terms of what we saw, I mean, there's a lot of hype going into that position. The Texas guys were making a lot of noise and no one really made up for it. And I don't know, no one really stood out from the receivers. We'll talk about it more. There were some that I liked that we'll talk about when we get there. But Hunter, I would have liked to see what he can do with that wide receiver group. And just out of the defensive back wise, being at corner, I see why teams want to see him there first and foremost.
All right, so let's move on to probably the two biggest hitters from this group: Nick Emanwari, Malachi Starks at the safety position. Obviously, Emanwari, who was both our number one safeties in our top five at the position, obviously stood out extremely well athletically.
Yeah.
Didn't do any of the on-field drills, which allowed Malachi Starks to steal the show there and absolutely dominated there. So we know that they're both insane players at the position. I mean, are they? I think they got to be both first round picks because if one of them squeaks out, that is a steal and a half for whoever gets them.
Yeah, again, I think both are going to be in the first round. We'll see. Again, where do you pencil either one of those players in, and who do you pencil in first is going to be the question. But it's crazy watching that day, seeing Nick Emanori and his measurements come in, and then he starts running, and then he starts jumping, and then
Ridiculous.
did he finish with a perfect 10 RAS?
Yeah,
Or
I finished with. Let me check, but I believe he did finish with 10.
yeah, at one point he had it. I know he had a couple more drills left to do. And then Malachi Starks, I mean, I thought his 40 was lackluster. He had the third worst vertical jump. The shuttle was bad in my opinion, and the RAS shows that. And then
Finished with.
next thing you know, it was a 10.
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, perfect 10 for Imanori. But then you get to the on field. Like you said, Imanori didn't go, which smart for him.
yep.
And because he showed everything he needed to in the drills. And then Malachi Starks dominated. Because I said during our rankings, it very recently I had Nick Emanori jump because for over the last calendar year at least I had Malachi Starks as number one at that position in this year's class, and it still I don't know who I want
It,
between the
it.
two of them
I'll
after
tell you
seeing
right
that.
now.
And
We
Malachi
have our
Starks bouncing back.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now. We've got our big boards coming out in like 2.5 weeks. I mean, they're going to be within five places of each other. It's going to be so close because they're both such amazing talents. I was saying the Jets need a safety. God, I'd do
Either
anything.
one.
Trade back, take one of them, get them in the second, somehow trade back into the first round. I don't care. They'd be amazing. But the safety position actually kind of surprised me. I saw some pretty good performance there. We talked about Andrew Makuba last week, not on our top fives, but just outside of it. He had a
Yeah,
really
good
good
week.
week.
Yeah.
Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma. He was another guy that was kind of in the conversation for me for that top five. He was just out. He had a good week. Marquis Siegler out of Kansas State, both Kansas State guys. Marquis Siegler and Jacob Parrish had good weeks at safety and corner. But the safety position actually surprised me. I think there could be a few really good players that you get in that day two conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And there's going to be some guys that come up and get in there. I liked oh man, hang on. It's on the tip of my tongue. Let me pull up the scores. There's another guy on there that was really good that
There's Jonas
um
Sanker who had a really good.
oh Kelvin, Penn State.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought Kelvin had a pretty good week too, and I liked what he did, just answering questions, the way he handled himself in the interviews. And corner two, I talked about. I think it wasn't our rankings because it wasn't in my rankings, but the preview. I think for the combine, I said Darian Porter could
Yep.
be a guy that dominates. He had a 9.99,
Yep.
and the length was outstanding. The length of his arm length was a 96 percentile. His height was a 94 percentile, and then the guy goes and runs a 4.340 with a 1.49 10-yard split. That length, height, and speed, I said it was going to be a dangerous duo for a guy like him. And it was, for Nicky Manori at safety and Darian Porter. I remember us, talking to one of my friends over the weekend about it. It looked like in a movie where, one of those sci-fi movies where you get a clone made for the main character to be the perfect match to defeat him.
Yep.
Darian Porter is that for DK Metcalf.
Oh yeah.
And like that style of the big body wide receiver that you need a lengthy, tall guy that can run like DK can run. Darian Porter is that villain that just got built in a lab to go stop that main character.
Oh yeah. I mean, Darian Porter was a guy that I think we talked about a little bit. I don't think he made either of our top sevens when we were talking about it. I mean, he's
No.
creeping up there for me. I mean, almost 6'3", 195. Obviously, he dominated in the on-field drills, looked really good there, explosive. So that's a guy that, I believe converted from receiver to corner. So he's an interesting build there. We saw a lot of guys kind of jump up at this position. Caleb Ransaw out of Tulane, I think he had a really good week. Za Frazier obviously had the really good 40. We'll see another press corner style player. So we'll see kind of where he goes out. But then Trey Amos and Azariah Thomas, two other players at the position that I think very similar. It'll be interesting to see because I think Trey Amos had the better performance, but Azariah is still a year younger. So we'll see what goes on there. But two other tall, more physical corners that checked off some boxes this week at the combine. And then let's move to the tight ends.
Okay.
Obviously, missing Tyler Warren and Colson Loveland. Neither of them performed. Uh, Mason Taylor stole the show, though. I mean,
Oh
he
yeah.
dominated. I mean, I was watching the gauntlet drill, and I mean, I don't know how
That
many times
was
they brought it up throughout the entire
that was one of the best gauntlets I've ever seen.
yeah, he was just you couldn't even see the tracer because it was just right over the line. It was
Yeah.
perfect. Um, but he looked really good overall. I mean, he's gonna move up a lot of draft boards, I think. And then one of my guys that I really like, Terrence Ferguson, he had a great week. Obviously, fastest 40. But I think one of the concerns that I had with him was his blocking ability. And I think in some of those on-field drills, he showed that he can be a two-way style tight end and not be a liability if you had to put him on the line. So I really liked what I saw of him.
Yeah, and T Ferg did really good. He really was the one that was able to step up and shine without Elijah Arroyo. He didn't test either, and then Loveland and Warren. Someone was going to pop out of that group because of that, and I was glad it was him because he's one that I like too. And the Bears were meeting with him, so he kind of got put on my radar at the beginning of the week after he mentioned that he was meeting with the Bears. Gunnar Helm, we talked about the issue with him. Now that we know and it's out there, Harold Fannin Jr. had a pretty rough combine. I mean, for a guy who we talked about during our tight end rankings, like he is the athletic guy that already is going to be, graded on his athleticism. And he didn't check really those boxes that we saw on tape at the combine when it's all athleticism based. I don't know what was going on with him this week. We'll see maybe if something gets cleared up. If he has a pro day with Bowling Green and anything else like later in the process before the draft, but not a good week for Harold Fanta Jr.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the themes that I saw when I was watching the tight ends this week. Is I feel like guys like Harold Fannin Jr. or Rondé Gadsden, Jake Brenningstool, who are more of like the one trick pony kind of tight ends. They're seam runners, athletic, that kind of thing. They're kind of falling down the board a little bit, in my opinion, because I mean, obviously, we talked about Terrence Ferguson having really good combine, Mason Taylor, we've got Elijah Arroyo, Gunnar Helm, if he performs well at his pro day, gets that speed up a little bit, he's going to be up there. And then I was really impressed. Joshua Simon out of South Carolina, Jalen Conyers out of Texas Tech. I mean, Jackson Hawes had a really good performance at the combine as well, where I feel like, and Mitchell Evans out of Notre Dame, really liked him. These guys are all kind of, they're good at one side of the spectrum at tight end, but they showed and checked boxes that they can do the other, no matter what it was. Whereas Harold Fannin and Rondé Gadsden, Jake Brenningstool, they kind of struggled in the more physical side of the game. So we'll see how teams kind of evaluate that. But we were talking about after it, it's going to be tough to stack this board because it is really interesting to see how they performed, and the guys that we wanted to perform well didn't really do it. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting group.
Yeah, and some of them still were able to showcase different things because, tight end's such a weird position because you either have your slot, your big slot tight end, or you have your inline blocking tight end. And being able to show either one that you might not have been good at on tape and clean up some of the questions on your strength or clean up some of your questions on your athleticism helps a lot. And it was good to see some of those players answer some of those questions and still try to stand out with the top guys not performing.
The negative highlight of the week was definitely Harold Fannin Jr. pushing the sled like around in a circle. I was watching that and I was like, I saw him walk up and I was like, all right, Harold, let's see if you can do this. This is where you need to shine and show that you can do this. Didn't go well. But
Yeah, before we get off that day, I do
yeah.
want to mention one more defensive back in Jalen Noel because
Oh
I
yeah.
brought him up. He's in my honorable mention. He's now in my rankings. So
Wait,
I just
sorry,
want to
which
mention
one?
him. Jalen Noel out of was
Jalen
Iowa
Smith
State
out of USC.
or USC. Yeah, USC.
You said Jalen Noel, the wide receiver.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, Jalen Smith out of USC.
Jalen Smith. Yes, Jalen Smith. I liked him coming into it. It wasn't a crazy RAS,
Yep.
but he looked pretty versatile on the field, the on-field drills. So yeah, I'll get around Jalen Noel too. Don't worry. He's on my wide receiver list.
You
He's
know,
one
we
of
can
my
actually
guys.
we can actually we'll start with the wide receivers. Why not? Since we
Okay.
talked about that, we're moving on to day 3. A lot of people say is like the crown jewel of the combine here. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. We get to see some fast 40s. We get to see some fun on-field drills. Start with the wide receivers. We're going to start with Matthew Golden, obviously.
Okay.
He ran the fastest 40, even though his teammate said he was going to break the record. Didn't go well. But we heard from Mike Tannenbaum this week, Matthew Golden is going to be the first receiver off the board.
Crazy.
I mean, that's a big claim. Obviously, in our first mock draft, we had Matthew Golden to Cowboys, which could
I
be
think
back
he's
on the table
second
now,
or third receiver off our board, I
which
think.
was it was the second because I think we only had T Mac at that point.
Yeah.
So second receiver off the board there. With the news of Debo Samuel uh, going from the 49ers, there's potentially the opportunity for the Niners to go and get a wide receiver at 11. And with T Mac potentially falling out of that top 10, it'll be interesting to see how these teams kind of stack those kind of guys. Tet, Amika, Matthew Golden, and some of these other guys, Luther Burden. Where do these guys go? What do you think about that Mike Tannenbaum statement that Matthew Golden's going to be the first guy off?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about earlier, there's a uninspiring, that's the word I was looking for earlier, an uninspiring day from the wide receivers. You saw a lot of people or a lot more prospects fall
Yep.
this weekend at this position than rise. But Matthew Golden definitely looked like the best receiver at the combine. Just, I mean, not even just because of the fastest 40, but the size was still, he came in at 191, 5'11. Still some concerns there, but if you go to a team like we talked about with Dallas or San Francisco, that I'm looking at the two windows in the first round for him to land at. They already have established wide receiver ones. And we'll see what happens with Brandon Ayuk because there are some rumors floating about him this week. But if they're replacing Devo in that role in that offense, or you have a number 2 guy behind CeeDee Lamb with the Cowboys, where you want kind of a little bit of a smaller wide receiver who's kind of a burner, I can see why he could be the first one off the board. and maybe the first one on teams' draft boards at this position.
Yeah. It's interesting to see because I mean, I love my Texas guys, Matthew Golden. He's still kind of in that wide receiver 3-4 conversation for me. And when I'm looking at it, when I think I'd still prefer Emeka Egbuka over him if you're looking for more of like the versatile kind of receiver. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how players value the two. Obviously, Matthew Golden's a lot quicker, really good route runner. But I think I'm still leaning toward Emeka Egbuka on that smaller side receiver. But I mean, I still think Golden's going to be a mid to late first round pick. But we'll see. Obviously, it depends on how the pieces fall. If Tet ends up going in, the top 10, and then the Niners end up getting a receiver, and then the Cowboys want a receiver, he could be right there at
Yeah,
12 or top 15. So we'll see what happens. But you talked about some players falling. Tez Johnson,
yeah.
154, ran a 4.51. You know, I've been seeing a lot of things about people saying, he's a UDFA now. I don't think it's that
Oh
bad.
no,
It's
no.
not even close to that bad. We saw Tank Dell run a 4.49 in his
Yeah,
combine. I mean, it's not a game changer, but I mean, we would have liked to see a lot faster 40 out of him.
yeah. I mean that was the comparison going into it. I talked about that name was getting thrown around the combine. I didn't know if I liked it per se, but from a size standpoint, it makes sense because you go back to the combine numbers. Tez Johnson was 5'10", 154. Tank Dell was 5'8", 165. And then he ran a 4.49. He had a 1.5 10-yard split. Tank Dell, Tez Johnson, like you said, the 4.51 with the 1.58. I mean, Tank Dell still fell to the third round. The Broncos are going to like this guy. Bo Nix is going to push hard to get his brother drafted in Denver. He's not going to be in a UDFA. That's a little bit of an overreaction.
It,
I saw that too on Twitter. This guy's he's still gonna go in there somewhere. Isaiah Bond, I had him just one of my losers. Sorry, I didn't mean to put your Texas guy on the
no,
list, but
I didn't even
he
have him
was
on my top seven. You know that. Like
yeah, yeah.
I don't even think he's in my top 15 receivers. So do not.
All that talk around a 4.39 was pretty funny, and I didn't even think he even
Funny
looked that
part is it's
fast in the
still a good
drills.
time. Like he ran a
Yeah, it still is
4.4.
a good time.
Like he
Yeah, but like
just talked too
he's not
much.
Xavier worthy.
But all right, so
Um,
before we move on to those other positions, real quick.
yeah,
Um, first, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel. You talked about him. Jaden Higgins checked a box running that 4.46, first of all. And then Jalen Noel, he did exactly what we were expecting him to do. Ran
yeah.
fast, explosive, did really good on the on-field drills. I mean, both of those guys, I mean, they have to be at least second round picks. I mean, I don't see how they get past the 60th overall pick. They are top 60 players, no question, maybe even top 50.
Yeah, people are going to worry about Jalen Noel's size too. And a big question for him was his strength going into it.
Yep.
The guy's 194 pounds and did 23 reps of 225 on bench. Question answered.
Yep. There you go.
And his footwork looked just as good as it did on tape going through the drills. And I mean, he's still my mini Keenan Allen.
Yep.
And with what he can do with his first step, his release, manipulating defenders within 5 yards, and then his route running ability. And then, like we said, the explosiveness. I mean, this guy jumped 11-2. I mean, he had a good week. I love how Jalen Noel performed.
Absolutely ridiculous. All right. Let's real quick. Two guys. You really like Luther Burden. I really like Trey Harris. I'm going to say right now, Luther Burden check boxes for me. I mean, he ran quick. He looked good in on-field drills. I'm still concerned about his route tree, whether, he's able to do that at the next level. Did Trey Harris check any boxes for you?
Uh, it's so weird. I mean, all those in that tier, Emeka Buka, Trey Harris, Luther Burden. I'm beginning to question which ones actually go in the first round and which ones fall into day two. And I think that's an honest conversation we need to start having after watching all these guys perform because I didn't know if any of those three really stood out and really separated themselves from the other. And I think all three are going to suffer because of it. And there's a possibility we might see all three fall out of it
Yep.
and go in, that day two range, especially. I mean, it makes things interesting. The free agent class is horrible. I mean, you're looking at Darius Slayton as your top wide receiver. Tutu Atwell is out there, and he hasn't done anything in his career, and they've like got him in top five free agent wide receiver rankings.
Not looking good.
But the thing we're going to see is these trades are going to start going down. I mean, does Devontae get traded? Does Brandon Ayuk get traded? What's going to happen with, Cooper Kupp's going somewhere. We already saw Debo go somewhere. Teams recognized what this wide receiver position looked like this week, and over the next couple of days leading up to the new league year, there's people are going to make some moves that need wide receivers bad. I mean, what do the Pittsburgh Steelers do now after seeing Emeka Ibuka, Trey Harris, and Luther Burton perform? They
It'll
might
be
go out and get somebody else.
yeah. I think it's all going to obviously free agency comes first. We're going to see what happens. T. Higgins going to be that big first name. What happens with him? But there are a lot of wide receiver needy teams here. We're looking at the New Orleans Saints potentially in the top 10, Carolina Panthers in the top 10. Talked about the Niners and the Cowboys. We're looking at the Bengals if they lose T. Higgins. We're looking at the Steelers. We're looking at the LA Chargers if they don't get Colson Loveland or any of their top guys. Buffalo Bills. There are a lot of wide receiver needy
Oh,
teams. The question
yeah.
is, do they go out and get that guy? Or do they wait and go and get a Jaden Higgins, a Jalen Noel, Alec Ioman, or a Jack Betch in like the second round? So it'll be interesting to
Yeah.
see. But those guys could end up dropping in the second round if those teams decide, you know what, let's hold off, get them later, and prioritize other positions at this time.
Yeah. And DK is another one.
Yep, DK.
Yeah, I saw some DK rumors this week. He might be on the move and go somewhere. I mean, Green Bay was mentioned with DK. I still think the Chargers as a good fit for an alpha wide receiver, and he can stay on the West Coast. I think DK gets moved too, potentially this offseason. So definitely some big change up of the wide receiver market in terms of the entire offseason, just from this combine performance.
100%. Now let's move on to the running back position here. This is a position that, again, a lot of hype going in. I mean, they did it. How many 4-4s did we see? A lot of people looked
Oh,
really good. I mean, it's a deep group. There was a little bit of movement on my board potentially at the top, at the bottom. I have no idea what I'm going to do from like 5 to like 20. I have no idea where some of those guys are going to be. So that's going to be really hard to do. Who are your standouts at the position?
yeah, and I mean the speed was there. I think the size was there too. I mean, Quinshaw Judkins was 221. You had Caleb Johnson 224. Omari and Hampton was 220 plus two, and they were still running like in the 4.4s, some were like low 4.5s. So the size and speed was on display out of this group. I think Omari and Hampton looked the best, out of my opinion. He tested or interviewed well. I like what he was saying there, and he stressed the importance of pass block and being a pass blocking back, and that being a key trait of his. And then running a 4.4, 4.46 with a 10.5.4 split. And then I think the vertical and the broad jump were pretty good for him too, given his size. And Amari and Hampton could be a sneaky first round pick at running back. I mean, if you ask Mel Kiper, he's going to be a top 15 selection to go to the Cowboys. But I think Amari Hampton, Mel Kiper might have been onto something there because I think he looks like a first round pick after this week.
Yeah. I mean, Amari Hampton's a guy that I had a little bit lower on my board, more just because, I didn't get to watch a ton of film on him at the time. But I started watching it, really liked him, was in my top 4. Definitely moved above Caleb Johnson, in my opinion. Not entirely sure about Travion Henderson. I've had him as my RB2 for the entire year so far. He's still hanging on because he had a good performance at the combine. Martin Hampton sneaking up there because I really liked his ability. I loved his ability in under contact, being able to have contact balance, be able to break tackles. I loved his patience. Didn't really see his speed too much. Saw it this week. Check that box, no question. So he's a guy that's definitely moving up my board. Some other guys that impressed me, Damian Martinez, a guy that was in and around my top 10 for running backs. Well, obviously, we're going to do our top 10s next week at the running back position. DJ Giddens performed really well, really good in the athletic testing. And then Brashard Smith and Donovan Edwards. Those are two other guys that I really liked. Again, more athletically, did really well and kind of showed people that, we're here too into that top 10 potentially conversation.
Yeah, and someone who did some good positional drills was Dylan Sampson. Um, don't think he ran the 40, but I liked
He
what we
didn't know.
saw. Yeah, he did not do the 40. And it looks like I'm pulling it up. His numbers, 10-4 broad jump, 35 vertical jump. He's, I don't know, not the best. He's 5'8", 200. I would like to see a little more explosiveness out of him, but I mean, he looked shifty
Yeah,
on the drills that he was doing on the field. So he was another one that I think wrote him down as a standout just because of what I watched. Um, doing the works and bags and the dummies and all the things they're working between.
yeah,
He's a shifty guy.
yeah. And I think you bring up the 40, got to talk about it. It's the highlight of the combine. Byshawn Tutton Byshawn Tutton out of Virginia Tech. Obviously ran like a bat out of hell, destroyed it, low 4.3. Um, I don't really know if he has the change of direction ability and the vision. I didn't really see as much of it. I see a lot of people in the draft community talking about, how they're really high on him. I'm not as high on him as some other people, but this definitely caught my attention because he did perform well on the on-field drills and obviously in the 40. So it'll be interesting. I'm going to watch more film on him, but he's a guy to keep an eye on as potentially a day two guy. This is another position we talk about the tight ends where it's going to be hard to stack some of these guys, and teams are going to have a lot of different opinions on what they need, because he's very different than a Woody Marks, who's most likely a third down back to start his career, and an Ollie Gordon, who is more of like a bruiser, right? And then the guys that we talked about at the top that are potentially more three down backs. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. One guy that did not test, Cam Scatterbo, would have loved to see him on the on field drills.
Yep.
I mean, the vert was insane. We're going to see him most likely at the pro day in
Yeah.
Arizona State, see what he does. I mean, I think if he runs a 4.5, he's set as a day two guy. If he runs slower than that, we'll see. But I mean, we saw his tape; it speaks for itself. He's going to be effective. It's just, where does he fall on teams' boards as a priority if he doesn't have the NFL level speed?
Yeah, Scadabo, I was gonna say just like actually I was just about to mention him. I think he might have lost a little bit of ground this week just because of that injury and not being able to run, but he easily can make that back up
Yeah.
and get that back where it needs to be. And at once he does this pro day, runs the 40, can get back in that conversation. I think Damian Martinez, the numbers aren't the flashiest for him, but running a 4.58 and his size is 5'11", 217, but this is a guy who can like run through some dudes.
Yeah.
I know trying to look at some bruiser backs in this class and looking at different PFF, yard after contact per attempts, those kind of things. He was always at the top of it. So his name's been on my radar, just seeing the production that he had and being able to run through some people. And a 4.41's pretty respectful, or respectable, for his style of game. I thought, well, okay, you match that speed up with what he can do with his power and strength and getting off of defenders. David Martinez kind of on my list a little bit. And we'll see once we get to rankings where I put him at. But right now, I'm probably leaning honorable mention for him.
All right, let's move on. There's plenty to talk about this running back group. We'll talk about him a little more when we get to our top tens
Yeah.
next week. But the position of the day, everybody loves to see him, the quarterbacks. Underwhelming to say the least for a lot of these guys. Let's talk about the main guy, Jackson Dart, the guy that's in the conversation to be the third best quarterback. Was he the best? Probably out of the guys there. But as a guy that loves him and he's in the conversation for my quarterback too, I did not see enough. And Shador is kind of he might end up Jackson Dart's been my quarterback too for a long time, but he just keeps disappointing me. Disappointed me at the Senior Bowl. He's disappointed me at the combine. If Shador has a really good pro day, I mean, I think I might have to give up on my Jackson Dart QB2 dreams, even though I think he's got all the potential in the world. What do you think?
What happens when Shadur Sanders gets to the pro day at Colorado, has everyone fly out to Denver and goes, I don't really feel like it.
He might move out of my top five if he's doing that, if I'm being completely honest. Because that you got to perform at some point. You got to go out there
Yeah.
and perform. There's so
And
many
there's
questions.
a reason he's not performing.
Yeah.
We've seen this guy throw the ball. We know why
Yeah.
he's not doing it,
Yeah.
but you got to do it at some point.
It's it That's my problem with him. And we're gonna talk about this more when we get into our actual quarterback rankings next week. So I don't want to talk too much about it. But I mean, quarterback 2 to 5, in my opinion, are really close. I think there's a big gap between Cam Ward at 1 and the 2, much bigger than most people have it. And then there's a
Yeah.
much smaller gap between 2 and 5 than most people have for me. So it's, people, if I go out there in a week and we do our quarterback rankings and I've got Shador as my QB4, it's not necessarily that he's like really bad. It's just the other two guys are just a tad bit better at what they do. So I think Shador not playing is strategic, but he's got to prove some people wrong in some of these things. If he doesn't have the strongest arm, he doesn't have the strongest arm, right? If he's not the fastest guy, he's not the fastest guy, but you got to go out there and show your strengths. And he hasn't done that yet.
Yeah, and it's crazy for two quarterbacks going, potentially 1 and 2, or at least the top two at the position when it comes to coming off the board. How much of a gap came out of this weekend with neither Cam Ward or Shador Sanders testing at all? And it seems like Cam Ward, like we all figured coming into it, is the guy, and that testament's a lot
Yep.
stronger after this week. And we'll see what happens because Jackson Dart once again looked pretty good, and we'll see because I mean he could reach that. It seems like first round category.
Yep.
It's just what team wants to pull that trigger on Jackson Dart and take the risk on his development.
Yep. Talking
And
about
Will Howard, I do want to say, I appreciate you showing up and throwing the ball. You showed up and also testing. I mean,
Yeah.
lowest vertical and broad jump and out of the little group of quarterbacks we saw. Thanks for showing up and at least showing up and performing because we can't say that about some of the other quarterbacks out there.
I'll tell you right now, Cole. He was my quarterback 5 going into this week. He's not anymore. I was looking at my like it. No, he's not, and it was really disappointing because he was a guy that you look at him. Obviously, he didn't have an amazing career at Kansas State, but he showed flashes. Right, he's always had that buzz about him that he could be a guy. Right, then he goes to Ohio State and he performs much better, but there's always the question mark. You got these Ohio State receivers, you've got this great offensive scheme. How much of it is just, them creating elite separation and him not having to make the tough throws? And you look at it and you're like, you can still see that little bit of spark there and he could be that guy. This week, he was just off. He was off
Yeah.
completely. He didn't perform athletically, he didn't perform on the field. And he didn't do himself any favors here.
And someone who did, and I've knocked on him a lot, Jalen Milroe threw the ball pretty well. I would have
See,
liked to see him run, but as bad as he was at the Senior Bowl week, he looked better.
he looked
Somehow his hand grew like an inch and a half,
Yeah,
but
I don't know how that happened. I'd love
but
to
I
know
think
how
he
he did
looked a
that,
little
but I
better.
don't know how
And
that happens.
we'll see how his pro day looks. But I mean, he had a couple good deep balls. The Detroit Lions, they met with him. He's on their radar. He should just kind of lay low for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Do a small little workout. I mean, it's going to be at Bama. It won't be that small during his pro day, but Milroe, I say he's going to be on the team. Someone's going to draft him. And it looks like, I mean, maybe Detroit might be that team.
See, I still don't think he performed better than he did the Senior
Yes,
Bowl, but
it wasn't good, but
he's still
it was
so
better.
inconsistent. I mean, I'm scrolling through Twitter and all I'm seeing is that one deep ball he threw that was like beautiful,
Yeah.
but he airmailed like 3 of his 4 throws to the sideline. He was short on his other 3 deep balls that he threw. And I think the only reason why people are talking about him doing better is because no one else played well at the position. And they're like, oh, let's bring up the Jalen Milroe hype again because everybody else played bad and he looked better. I'm sorry. I'm just not falling for it. I, I'm just going to put this out there. He can be a very good quarterback. He has all the arm talent in the world. He just needs to be developed, right?
Yes.
I don't think he's even a day 2 pick. I think he's an early day 3 pick. if you really like him and you've got a good development team, you can reach for him in the third round. I'm seeing people having him as QB3, QB4. Ridiculous. Like it depends on what team you are. If he needs the Jordan Love treatment, he needs to sit behind a
Yes.
guy for 3 years. He needs to completely develop, and he needs to be in a team that knows how to develop a quarterback. Like it all depends on team. When you're talking about when you're on the outside looking in, right? Like us, we're not with a team. We are purely evaluating who's the best, who's the worst. He's not even a top 5 quarterback. He is not top 6. He's not top 7. He's in that bottom echelon of players right now. He's got the potential. He's just not there.
That's not, I'm glad the Lions are interested because
Yeah,
they're absolutely the team that should be.
exactly.
And that's the best spot for them. To say something good about someone who threw the ball this week,
Yeah.
I think I think Brady Cook out of Missouri looked good. And I know, yep, you
Yeah,
might
he
looks
did.
like you were getting ready to say something too. I mean, 4.59 40, and just throwing the ball, the zip was there. The ball's, lasers out of his hand. And say what you want about boosting the stock out of Brady Cook, because I don't know where he even was going into this week or where it is now, because how this quarterback position is, but the guy looked good.
Yeah.
Out of the group we saw throwing the ball, he was the best one.
Cool. I'll tell you right now. I remember you and I were texting during the Shrine Bowl Senior Bowl week, right? And I'm watching the Shrine Bowl game, and I see Brady cooking. I didn't even know he was at the game. I didn't even know he was coming out this year in the NFL draft. All right. But people forget his 2023 season was legit 3,300 yards, 3-1 touchdown interception ratio. His only 2 losses on the season were to Georgia by 1 possession and to Jaden Daniels led LSU by one
Yeah.
possession. And he put up 20 plus points in each of those games. Like, I'm not saying he's elite. Like, he's in my top 10 conversation, right? Like, he's on the borderline, the 8 to 10 range, maybe just outside of it. Like, he's not going to be good, but he's a guy that can go in, potentially be a career backup kind of guy and run an offense. He's athletic. He can run. He can throw. He had a good day.
Yeah.
The last 2 guys that I want to talk about at this position, or 3 guys, they're all kind of in the same boat. Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord, Tyler Shuck. Just looking at it right now, how do you have those 3 ranked?
I mean, everyone, for whatever reason, out of nowhere, Tyler Shuck was the guy everyone was talking about. I've already seen a mock with him in the first round, which is preposterous. Get him out of there. Get him out of there. But his arm strength looked good, and there's a couple misses, but he had some good deep outs that he was throwing from there. That I wrote down for him. What I noted, he's the only second or the only quarterback, excuse me, in the second group to run a 40.
Yep.
Hats off to
It was
that.
electric. It was
Bigger
so
hats
fun
off.
to watch.
You ran a faster 40 the second time with no break. Because
Yeah.
usually the groups, you go back, you wait for everyone in your group to run again. He ran, walked back down, and then ran a faster time the second time. That I just put that down as a funny note. Tyler Shuck, though, I mean, he looked good. I
Yeah.
mean, compared to Quinn Ewers, I think he interviewed well. And then Kyle McCord, I didn't really see anything notable for him. I mean, and the accuracy was there. I'm trying to go back to my notes here. Uh, yeah, I thought well, delivery was a little slow, but I mean, nothing really notable that I took away
Yeah.
from watching his
I mean,
performance.
say real quick, Tyler Shuck, pure vibes. Love him. He just has fun playing the game. He loves it. If you want a guy, he reminds me, like his personality reminds me of Drew Lock rapping on the bench when he was in Denver. Like that's the kind of guy that I see out of him. And he's got arm talent. I mean, there's no question about it. He's a guy that got experience, injury issues, and you never know. He's got the arm talent to be an NFL caliber guy. Whether he's going to be a franchise quarterback, I don't know. The age thing, no one should worry about that because this time period, quarterbacks are playing till they're 40. You're still getting 14 years out of him if he ends up being a franchise quarterback. So,
Well,
whatever.
he's older than both of us, and
Yeah.
we're a couple years out of college now, so.
Hey, that means there's still time for us. That's all that matters. Then the other 2 guys, I love Kyle McCord. I'm still high on him. I think he still has the best tape out of any of those guys.
Yeah, his tape
Um,
definitely is
he
pretty
he didn't
good.
stand out as a Kyle McCord fan. He disappointed me this week. But he still had some good throws. And then Quinn Ewers, so good in the short and intermediate game. can't throw a deep ball for his life. He's short on every single
Always
one.
has.
So he's just a guy that he's going to go to a team like Indianapolis in like the third or fourth round. He's going to sit behind. He's probably going to end up being a game manager type quarterback if he gets the chance to start. He could develop. He's got the instincts. He's got the ability to throw. He just can't throw deep. So we'll see what happens. But overall, quarterback position underwhelming. But there is some promise in some of these guys.
Mhm.
So all right, let's move on to the final positions today. Offensive line, the big boys. A lot of them put on a show. Cole, who stood out to you?
Yeah, we talked about the tweeners was the big, the guard tackle tweeners was a big storyline of this year's class, and the potential of what's going on with the tackles position, which guys are going to establish themselves as big tackles. We obviously didn't see Josh Simmons, who probably is going to be the number one true tackle and actually start at tackle. In my opinion, I think Armand Imbo moves inside, Will Campbell moves inside, Kelvin Banks potentially moves inside, all at the next level. But the two surprises to me, and it shouldn't be a surprise because the Georgia Bulldogs produce some freaking dogs. But seeing Jared Wilson at center and Tate Ratledge, I mean, every year the Georgia boys in the trenches are going to absolutely dominate the RAS scores. And we saw both of those guys at the top of the board this year.
Yeah. I mean, Tate Ratledge, when you talk about true guards, no offensive tackles shifting over or centers shifting over, true guards. He's my number 2 guard. Love the guy. Amazing flow, first of all. That was
The mullet
majestic.
was there.
That was majestic watching him run. Saw an edit on Twitter today of Freebird playing while he was
I
running.
was about to
It
say, I
was
got to send you the edit of
it was
Freebird.
majestic. But that's obviously I really like him. I think Dylan Fairchild from Georgia also performed really well.
Mhm.
The Iowa man, Connor Colby, he performed really well. I think overall the centers performed really well. I
Yeah,
like
which is
Jake Majors.
surprising. I didn't think the
Yeah,
centers were going to be
I like
as big
Jake
of a
Majors out of
storyline.
Texas. Jake Majors did really well in the on-field drills. Eli Cox, all around, awesome out of Kentucky. You already talked about Jared Wilson, and then Drew Kendall. Drew Kendall at Boston College had a really good all-around performance as well. And then I saw some the requests to take snaps. Tyler Booker, he's my number 1 guard right now. I think he'd be a beast at center. He'd
Put
be
that big dog at center.
no, I'll tell you, he was our center when we played in middle school. Why doesn't he be the center now? He was a beast then. He's going to be a beast now. And I think with the athletic testing that he did, it would make sense for him to move to the inside. And I think he'd be really good there. Gray Zabel also took snaps at center. I think that's probably where he's going to end up being at the NFL. Tate Ratledge, as we talked about, he also took some snaps at center. Clay Webb, Jackson Slater. So there are some guys that had good performances today. And I think the center position is going to be stacked when we talk about like who's going to play center at the next level. There could be a lot of starting centers come out of this draft. Like there really could be.
Yeah, and even going back to Tyler Booker, he had a good week, but I don't know if it was the week I was expecting. I was expecting this guy to be at the end of it. Okay, he's a top 15, top 10 pick. I mean, I was looking at him with the Bears as a guy that could be, a potential starter, at either guard position and lock up for that team for years. And I still don't know. I mean, even 10 seems like a reach for me for Tyler Booker. And now, after seeing Gray Zabel and what he's shown at the Senior Bowl, what he showed this week, his interviews were tremendous. It gave all the right answers, and he can play 5 positions. I'm starting to wonder if the interior guys and how they come off the board, if Gray Zabel even might come off the board before Tyler Booker in the first round when it's all said and done.
I was going to say, I think, no bias, obviously. But, Tyler Booker, I still think is the best guard when you look at the tape, right? I mean, when you watch the tape, he's a beast.
Yeah.
I think the way that we've seen these other players play, the Tate Ratledges, the Donovan Jacksons, the Gray Zabels, even if he's still the first guard off the board, I think he's going to drop because these teams are going to be looking and saying, hey, we'd much rather have an Armand Membu, a Kelvin Banks, a Will Campbell, what's his name? Jonah Savanea, a
Oh yeah, yeah,
Hunter Essery, who's an offensive tackle that can play offensive guard as well, then go out and get the best offensive guard. And I
yeah.
think, we've seen over the past few years that flexibility and versatility to play across the line is huge with all the injuries that come in. You've got one of your best guys that can flip and play another position. If you're not comfortable with the backup at that position, that is huge. So that's why I think Tyler Booker's probably going to drop potentially, unless offensive guard center is a team's number one need and need a player there. So if you go out and
Yeah.
say, this is our number one need, we need this position, he'll still be the first guy off the board and high. But if he's
Yeah.
not, he's going to drop just because of the depth of the position that we're seeing.
Mhm. And one more, I think like, stake I'm going to, slam in right here. Will Campbell, we knew he's a top 10 pick, a lock for sure. We had in our mock draft, Kelvin Banks, not in that top 10. People think he could be, the second lineman off the board. I think Armand Embo is a lock in the top 10.
Top
And not only
10.
that, I
Ooh,
don't think he even makes it to 10.
ooh,
I'm looking right now at your Jets and I'm looking at the Saints. I think one of those teams take him in the top 10 and feel really comfortable doing so after seeing him
okay.
this week.
I was going to say Armand Membu has moved up my board significantly. I think, we've seen Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks, the arms, definitely a question mark. I still think if he stays at tackle and is effective, Will Campbell's still the best tackle in the class. But I'm looking at Armand Membu. I'm looking at Josh Simmons. I'm looking at Arasante Ursary as three guys that could potentially move up. I'm really liking Ariante Ursary after watching some more film this past weekend. Josh Simmons, obviously he's got the injury. We still got to see. Apparently, he could potentially perform at the pro day. If that happens,
That'd
that
be
could
nice.
be huge for him. Because I think he could potentially be a top 15 pick if he performs well and shows that he's, gotten over this injury. But
Maybe even Bears maybe could take Josh Simmons if he looks good at
I,
10.
I think the offensive tackle position is so interesting because we're seeing now if teams go into this draft and they say Will Campbell's a guard, Kelvin Banks is a guard, Armand Membu's a guard, Jonah Savanaya is a guard, right? We're going to be looking at Josh Simmons, Ariante Ursary, Josh Connerly, Charles Grant, Emory Jones, Ozzie Trapilo as like the top tackles. So where
Hmm.
do they do one of these guys that we think is a fringe first round pick, most likely second round, and the third rounders that could potentially go into the second round because of this position? Because teams need offensive tackles, they always need them. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how the board plays out. Because some of these guys, like a Charles Grant, could end up going much earlier than expected because of the lack of true tackles in this class.
Yeah. And something that I've seen a little bit and how this affects it, talking about that tackles. I think Ronnie Stanley, even at over 30 years old, he's going to get a lot of money. They're talking about Carolina, or not Carolina, who was it? The Chiefs and the Patriots. And there's one other team I saw this week connected with Ronnie Stanley. And it's because of what you just said, the uncertainty of the true tackles in this class. There's going to be a bidding war for a guy like Ronnie Stanley in the free agent market to get a lot of money because of how some of these guys performed. And Josh Simmons could be the one to blow him away. Once if he can get on the field and the medicals clear up by his pro day, that's going to be a big one to see.
I mean, on a closing note, Josh Simmons going into the season after he cleaned up the penalties. I mean, people were saying he could potentially be a top 5 pick in this draft. Then he
Yeah,
got
and
injured.
then
If,
yeah,
if he's
bad injury.
cleared, I mean, I don't think there's any reason why he couldn't potentially be a top 10 pick again because he has the talent. I think everybody has
Hmm.
him lower on the board just because of the uncertainty of a 330-pound man getting back on a weakened leg. So
Right.
close it off. Exciting combine week. Next up is the pro days. Exciting to see some of these guys like Josh Simmons that we talked about, like Shador Sanders. So coming up next, we've got our post combine mock draft on Thursday. Then
Nice.
we will go into our last two position groups of running backs and quarterbacks. And then 2 weeks from now will be the start of our top 50 big boards. So
Nice.
that's what's looking up. That'll be the end of our positional groups. Go into division stuff. And then we're getting closer and closer to the draft. So some exciting stuff going on. And we will see you all on Thursday for our mock draft 2.0.